At first, actually, it reminded me of a poem that I read at my grandfather's funeral. That was a couple of years ago. It's about nature and death and memories and the turn of the season. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Robert Frost, Nothing Gold Can Stay, it's called.
Very poetic, not easy for everyone to understand unless they are really into reading. I mean, like I'm not a big reader, but unless I put myself into this type of mode of reading, then I can understand. But for someone that just picks up a book and reads it from top to bottom, it's not easy writing.
Whether by way of living in dying, birth and death are merely happen to be, or behind a hoping yes, each no doubts, time derides dreams until the last heartbeat. Whether by way of proving nothing false before the doom, the ground turns to the sky, or into some wisdom's pride cracks a fool. Someone sees some no one under the skin. Whether by way of saying less but more, November recounts its petals in June, or the sun confides itself to the moon. All that breathe and walk do not imagine. Whether by way of kissing a shadow, lost memories must return as stories, or low climbs high, meanwhile above falls down. Every morrow is due to be buried.
Whether by way of living and dying, birth and death are merely happen to be, or behind a hoping yes, each no doubts. Time derides dreams until the last heartbeat. Whether by way of proving nothing false before the doom, the ground turns to sky, or into some wisdom's pride cracks a fool. Someone sees some no one under the skin.
Whether by way of saying less but more, November recounts its petals in June, or the sun confides itself to the moon. All that breathe and walk do not imagine. Whether by way of kissing a shadow, lost in memories must return as stories, or low climbs high, meanwhile above falls down. Every morrow is due to be buried.
It's taking on some very epic themes, I think, like the sort of the connection between birth and death, which is often not necessarily talked about. They're usually seen as very separate things, but I think the poem brings them together in this quite beautiful way, which is reflected in the picture. And yeah, there's a sense of time and reflection. The November recounts its petals in June.
It's a very nice line.
Seasons sort of the fact that we're always living with memory, but at the same time situated in the present moment.
It really has this very interesting temporal sense of different times, whether it's different times of day, like the sun and the moon, or different times of year, like the November counts its flowers or counts its petals in June. It's very good at mixing these two different concepts of time, where it's like has a good sense of balance between the black and the white. I don't like using that term black and white, but this good term of
different
like
shades.
Yes and no. It has this interesting way of connecting the binary.
Black and white, or yes and no. It's like comparing opposite things.
These opposites, these two sides of life, the good and the bad, the fall and the spring, being confronted to that.
There's a lot of contradiction in it, a lot of ups and downs, like when I see it in colors, there's a lot of black and white thinking that's contradicted to each other.
It's a really good way of balancing these like light and dark themes, these themes of start and finish, the journey between birth and death, and the complicated route in between. It's a really good way of connecting these two extreme ideas.
There's a bit of a sad vibe, but perhaps contemplating somebody's passing or death. But whether or not that's a real person or like a stage in life or time, I wasn't quite sure. Seasons changing or old, like somebody close to the end of their life, looking back and giving sort of some final moment to maybe somebody younger or something.
As if I've taken a step back from reality and just looking at everything and sort of taking it in. As if I'm not really standing outside of it, but also not really participating in it. But I do feel part of everything that I'm reading. I imagine myself interacting with the world that I'm reading.
Whether by way of living and dying, birth and death are merely happen to be, or behind a hoping yes, each no doubts. Time derides dreams until the last heartbreak. Heartbeat. I'm sorry. Yeah, I like the first part because it's really clear and it shows what the poem is about. It's about birth and death, that are two facts that we all have in common in the life. I personally think a lot about death and also life, why we are living, and like that it's kind of senseless, and how we are living with the fact that we are all dying.
Time derides dreams until the last heartbeat, which is very true. Because through your life you go through these different emotional states and aspirations and motivations, and this continues up until the point of your dying breath or your last heartbeat. It's quite a good way of having these abstract concepts come together into a way that most people will understand, because the one thing that connects us all is death, and I think this is a very good way of connecting winter and nighttime and death with spring and summer and daytime and life. Like the way you describe the way the ground turns into the sky, it's quite a nice visual, but it does connect these two disparate ideas.
Before the doom, the ground turns to the sky, into some wisdom's pride cracks a fool. Someone sees some no one under the skin. Into some wisdom pride cracks a fool. That it sounds really cheeky, so that draws you in. And when you see a person, you don't know what's going inside, and this emotion to come outside.
Whether by way of saying less but more, November recounts its petals in June. I like that. That's very pretty and has a cyclical nature of seasons, months, memories, ghosts even.
I really like November recounts its petals in June, or the sun confides itself to the moon. That's there's very strong imagery in both of those.
Life has cycles, so everything dies, but there's also things. Nature is also giving birth, and that's also our own lives. We come to Earth, we live here, and then our life ends, but also new people's coming. So I like these opposites. Life has two sides, not only one.
It starts with whether by way of saying less but more, and then it continues in that way. All the sentences that follow are about oppositions that seem apparent but are not opposing at all. So it is in fact true that you can say a lot by saying less. November recounts its petals in June. It sounds like there's a delay, but it's not a delay, it's just the course of things, and if things take their natural course, then that's not slow, then that's not less or more, it just is. So it feels to me as if this sentence is sort of pushing away all those binary opposites. And that drew me into the poem, and that made it feel as if I was a beholder of it all.
Whether by way of kissing a shadow, lost memories must return as stories. They're obviously remembering or nonchalant about memories that happens in the past, and they're remembering it today. So they're reflecting.
I really like this kissing a shadow. I like the metaphor.
All low climbs high, meanwhile above falls down. Every morrow is due to be buried. Yeah, it's something very final. And I mean, first it's again comparing, there are highs and lows. Maybe the highs climb down or fall down, maybe the lows climb high. And I always know when there's rain there will be sun, as a metaphor. And it's always good to be positive, but still it's just very natural that all things end, and we shouldn't be surprised in a very negative way about that.
Weather is something like it doesn't really care what it is, and this is also have the effect of me from like a senseless life.
Structure in some of the words that you've used, more like Old English. The rhymes are sort of open to interpretation because they're not so, the sky is blue, I love you.
We've got rhymes, but they don't all repeat themselves exactly.
Sometimes it does have this rhyming couplet scheme, but in a different way where it's more of an alliterative way of rhyming couple rather than words that actually rhyme with one another. That is present, like June Moon works quite well, but I do like the alliteration, like dying and doubts in the first stanza, and I do like the way the words look, like shadow and down look like they're supposed to rhyme, but they don't.
Whether by way of living and dying.
10.
It flows well because there are 10 syllables in each line.
Someone who's lying in your bed, like a lover or somebody who's interested to see how you view reality. And that person is just there to take it all in and not to add something to that feeling, but to sort of live through the words that you're saying.
I see a man contemplating, and it could be alone, but it could also be as though maybe they've just shared the bed together and now the other person stepped away and they look back and now this person is telling them this beautiful poem.
There's a kind of ephemeral, dreamlike nature to the poem, and this man made of smoke, almost ghost-like, that can't be caught is I suppose fits, and it's quite a dark, I suppose you could view it as a dark poem as well.
In a way it is very posed yet relaxed.
It reminds me of like a scan, like a fetal scan. Like it feels like the sense of a baby, but at the same time this figure that's featured is kind of ageless. Like it's both.
And genderless.
And genderless again. It's kind of both adult and baby and beyond life, beyond death. So I think it fits the poem very nicely. Whether by way of living and dying, birth and death are merely happen to be, or behind a hoping yes, each no doubts, time derides dreams until the last heartbeat. Whether by way of proving nothing false before the doom, the ground turns to the sky, or into some wisdom's pride cracks a fool, someone sees some no one under the skin. Whether by way of saying less but more, November recounts its petals in June, or the sun confides itself to the moon. All that breathe and walk do not imagine. Whether by way of kissing a shadow, lost memories must return as stories. Or low climbs high, meanwhile above falls down. Every morrow is due to be buried.